So let's get started. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this webinar hosted by Morel. I hope you can all hear and see me. My name is Erik Vogselen. I will be your spokesman today. I have worked for Morel as a growing advisor for the last 5 years in Northwest of Europe, but I have been involved with cyclamen for over 15 years now. My colleague Guy Scherzer will support me today as a moderator behind the scenes in case something goes wrong with the technology. Please note a few housekeeping rules. Would you please be so kind to check whether your microphone is on mute? And if not on mute, please put it on mute to avoid any background noises. Thank you very much. This presentation will be recorded live so that it can be subsequently shared with you and maybe used for other training purposes. Just that you are aware that it's been recorded. If you encounter any connection problems during this presentation, please check your emails. Our moderator Guy will send you a new link which allows you to log on again. And oops, just some starting problems. So where were we? So if after this presentation there will be a little bit time for question and answer. Should you have any questions during this presentation, please send them via the chat function to Guy, and he will keep them apart, and then we will try and answer them after the presentation is finished. So during the course of this presentation, there will not be questions will not be answered. Okay, let's get started. Title of this webinar is Avoid the Traps of Humidity. Humidity problems are in the Northern European climate zones one of the biggest challenges for a cyclamen culture. But before we start talking about humidity, there will be a little flashback to the previous webinar about that one was about the preparation and the start of a cyclamen crop, and in particular the rooting stage. Well, now the summer has come to an end, or slowing is coming to an end, if we had any summer at all. This change of season brings different challenges. Where low humidity was a challenge at the start of the culture, so in summertime, we are now going into a season where high humidity can cause serious problems. So during these presentations, we will touch on the hazards with low humidity during summer and on the problems that high humidity can cause during the fall time. We will talk a bit about what wrong moisture management does and how it often can lead to BOTRYTIS issues in the culture. So in that perspective, a great part of this webinar will be about how to control humidity and to avoid BOTRYTIS, variety selection in relation to BOTRYTIS, sensitivity, and we will also speak a little bit about possible preventive sprays and how that works. And at the end of this presentation, we will talk a little bit about feeding strategy, because change of season also means a change of feeding strategy can be required. So move to the next slide and get really started then. So a little summary about the previous webinar. So during this last webinar, we talked about the start of the culture and explained that a good start is half the job done already. So it is important to look after your young plants well, as small plugs on a tray are always at risk of drying out, of course. And at the start of the culture, it's crucial to create a good climate with a high enough humidity to avoid root-borne diseases at a later stage of the culture. Also at the start, please water from the top until the roots are visible at the side of the pot or at the bottom of the pot. Water moderately and allow the soil to dry back before applying the next watering. And it is very important and crucial, and that was what the last webinar was mostly about, to build a good root system before you start to increase the feeding. And if during the culture you keep a moderate nitrogen regime, PGRs normally are not needed. Should you have missed the previous webinar, it has been recorded like this one is, and it is available on YouTube. Below on the slide, there is a link. You might not get this link now. I'll write it down quickly enough, but if you send us an email, we would either forward you the link or send you the presentation via mail. Change of season. So we are at the end of summer, entering slowly the autumn season. And the cyclamen crop, the potting season typically runs from middle of May until end of July, or for a Christmas crop, even until the middle of August. And some of you might even pot minis as we speak now until the end of September, because up to potting in week 40, it's not really needed that you need additional light to finish a cyclamen crop with sufficient flower. But in most cases, the culture is started with high light levels and finishes with very low light levels. As of course from week 25 onwards, then week 25 is when we have the longest day, and after that the day length will gradually reduce. And as the light, the hours of light, so the day length reduces, of course the light sum reduces because of that. And when the light sum reduces, the energy provided by the sun becomes less, and so the photosynthesis level of the plant will drop as well. So if we look at how that climate change looks in a greenhouse condition, I have prepared a few slides and a few graphs from climate recordings that we took at our trial in Holland, the MOREL trial in Holland in last year. So if we look at the graph here, the yellow line here represents the bar light level measured inside the greenhouse. So it's at crop level with the influence of the whitewash on the roof and the use of the mobile screen. So we actually see what happens on plant level. So as you can see here, up to mid-August, there has been a lot of sunshine, and then mid-August, the mobile screens came over a big part of the day. That's why you see a little bit of a drop in the yellow line here. In this example, you can also see that the light level has been quite high up until the middle of September. Mid-September, we have then removed the whitewash from the greenhouse roof, and we altered the mobile screen setting, and with the whitewash it was at 600 watts per square meter, and once the whitewash was removed we altered it to 400 watts per square meter just to compensate the difference. Allowing higher light levels on a cyclamen crop are not beneficial, because then you will exceed your light levels would be going beyond the light saturation points. What does that mean? That if you throw more light at the plants cannot actually process that energy and turn it into sugar or dry mass. So in fact, the higher energy level that you throw at plants above these thresholds would only increase the plant temperature, and that might lead to root-borne diseases later on in the culture. The black line in the graph here represents the average daily light sum. And so as you can see from the left-hand side, well, my screen is mirrored, I see. So from the left-hand side, I will keep my hands down. From the left-hand side to the right, as the year travels by, the black line goes down. So from the start until the end of the year, the lights, I must say, from the start of the cyclamen season till the end of the year, the light levels gradually go down. Actually, in around November time, the light levels are so low that very little flower buds and leaves will be developed because of the low energy levels we have then. But the leaves and flowers that are already formed then and are present in the growing tip, of course, they will grow out even at the lower energy levels during winter time. So if we look at the temperature in the same greenhouse here, this graph here, the red line represents the average daily temperature in the same greenhouse as from the previous graph with the light. So we can directly see that the light becoming less during the year. It has an effect on the temperature. As you can see, the black line starts rather high, around 25 degrees average temperature, and it goes all the way down to almost 15 at the end of the trial, the end of October. Funny to see is that although the second half of August we had quite high light levels and we used the mobile screens quite a little bit more, you can see that the temperature in that stage, the red line there, spikes a bit higher, goes a bit higher, and probably that is because when you use the screens you lock up a little bit of heat in the greenhouse. But what we also can see is that by the end of September, the temperature almost suddenly drops. And from then onward, what we will show on the next slide, when we look at the humidity increases significantly. So here again, the same period, same greenhouse, the blue line indicating the humidity. So what we can see is that the humidity gradually goes up as temperatures drop. So the black line here indicates the average per day, and you see that it starts around an average level per day at 60 and goes up until 70. So if we would zoom in on the humidity during any given day, you would notice that in this time of year, so beginning September, not only the humidity is constantly higher, but the number of hours where the humidity becomes higher during a day become longer. And this is where a lot can go wrong if we don't take the right actions. In this graph that you see here, the humidity from the end of September hardly ever goes below 70% anymore. So there's no stress from low humidity. But if we would not have any dehumidification actions in place here, the humidity would have gone over 80% during a bigger part of the day. So please note here in this graph that due to dehumidification actions that we did, the humidity hardly ever exceeded 80%. And we will explain how we accomplished this during this presentation. Just this as a background information. Here are the same three graphs presented in one slide. So if you follow the lines, the yellow lines, where the yellow line becomes lower somewhere mid of August is where you see the red line, the temperature line, go up. And at the same time, the humidity goes to very low levels. Whereas further on in the season, more to the right side of the graphs, you'll see that the light levels, the spikes are less high, and also the temperature becomes less high. And because of this, the humidity has increased or is continuously quite high. So in general, we could say that as day length reduces, light sun decreases gradually, and as a result of that, the light conditions, the temperature decreases, and the humidity goes up. And periods with higher humidity are getting longer towards the end of the year. That being said and done, what are the problems with low humidity? So this is back to the summertime, so a little bit back to the start of the culture, where you sometimes encounter very low humidities. So on the humidity graph I showed previously, you could see levels below 50% are not rare in summertime. Especially when the greenhouse is partly empty, it can be difficult to build up a microclimate in a greenhouse. So the absence of a good microclimate can result in disturbed transport of calcium and boron and can offset the balance in the plant. Now, calcium and boron are really depending on the transpiration. So leaves that evaporate the most will get most of the calcium and the boron, as the water is flowing from the roots mainly to those leaves that have the highest level of evaporation. However, the leaves in the growing tip, they often are folded together and they don't evaporate a lot. And as a result, if the plant is under stress, of drought or high evaporation, calcium and borium is not really well transported to the growing tip. So in the end, you might end up with problems caused by boron or calcium deficiency in the growing tip, and this can lead to malformation in the growing tip. As you can see on the picture on the left-hand side, you see some leaves that are a little bit curled, a bit cupped, and this is due to low humidity and problems with calcium. So actually, if you would look into the tip of the leaves, you would see that the leaf tip has been is necrotic, so it has died off. As a result of that, the leaf cannot normally stretch, and when it grows out, therefore it's curled upward. Plants will recover from calcium and boron C deficiency once the microclimate has been corrected. So once the humidity has gone up again, so new leaves will grow out normal again, but the damaged leaves, of course, stay damaged. Very often, these symptoms of leaf curling are mistaken with cyclamen mites. But in case of mites, you would find only a few plants having these symptoms, so the upward curling. And in case of calcium deficiency, virtually every plant will be affected. Also, in case of mites, you would see on the older leaves that there is already a little bit of wrinkling on the leaves, where the mites have been attacking the leaves, so to say. Yeah, like I said, most of the times it only concerns a few plants in a lot, not the whole crop. Whereas on the other hand, with calcium deficiency, most of the plants will be affected. Well, to avoid this calcium deficiency from happening, it is best to try and avoid humidity levels drop below 50%. So what you could do is, if you still have empty bays in your greenhouse, just keep watering the empty bays during the day to try and build up some humidity. Or if you have a high pressure fogging system in your greenhouse, you can use that to try and increase the humidity. Do not use watering booms, preferably, to create humidity, because with watering booms, even if you think they run at high speed, you are very often increasing the moisture content in the root zone. And because of that, the roots can become less inefficient. So actually, you can make the problem a bit worse. Where you're thinking that you are trying to increase the humidity, you are wetting the roots, make the roots less effective, and then probably cause problems with uptake from nutrients. So in case of mites, the plants will not grow out of the symptoms unless you, of course, apply a chemical treatment. And normally 2 applications with ivermectin, that's the active ingredient in Vertimec or Dynamic, usually does the trick. So that's the low humidity. What about high humidity? Because we are ending the summer, we're slowly traveling into the fall time, where we encounter higher humidities in these times. So in case of high humidities, fungus disease are always around the corner and likely to attack. So on the picture here, you can see a cotyledon leaf that is dying off. This, by the way, is fully normal, as all the energy has been taken from this leaf during the germination until the first leaves took over and actively started the photosynthesis of the plant. But here, BOTRYTIS has been developing on the cotyledon. Cotyledon is the seed leaf. If this cotyledon sits on a moist soil, it's very likely that it can become affected by BOTRYTIS. Although at first this might only look like rather harmless, there is a population of BOTRYTIS already developing in your greenhouse, which in a later stage, when the conditions become worse and become more in favor of the fungus, it might lead to an explosion all of a sudden of BOTRYTIS. As long as the light conditions are relatively high, and that is mostly the case still this time of year, UV light will slow down the the development of botrytis. The UV light can kill the fungus spores. But of course, if these cotyledon gets affected by botrytis and it sits under a dense deck of leaves, the light will not reach down all the way down till that cotyledon, and this is where slowly the botrytis can start to develop. So never think light when you have botrytis on the cotyledon. Try and limit the moisture of the pot to avoid botrytis from developing. Yeah, anyway, you can dry back the pot a little bit easier this time of year, because at this time of year the plants are no longer at high risk of wilting, and cutting back on water is highly recommended now and can more easily be done than in full summer. So on botrytis, actually, in cyclamen, we see two types of botrytis. Actually, both is Botrytis cinerea, but we see two different effects. So here we see the effect of botrytis on flowers. High humidities in the greenhouse very often can lead to flower damage. So on the right-hand picture, you see a clearly brown marking of the flower petals, and that make the plant unsellable, really. On the left-hand side, you see ghost spots on the flowers due to high humidity. Although these spots can be, in the eyes of a consumer, can look very pretty sometimes. Once the flower has been affected by botrytis, the shelf life of the flower gets shorter dramatically. So the pleasure that the consumer will have from these plants will be shortened. Sometimes these spots on the flowers are not visual, as such as on these light colors here. So in case you have darker flower colors, it's not that visible, but if you look closer, you can also see on the darker colors some lesions on the flower. So also the shelf life of those colors are not optimum. Both the brown marking and the ghost spots are caused by damage from the fungus Botrytis cinerea. So more harmful to a crop is the botrytis that we in English language often call gray mold. So as innocent as the fungus on the cotyledon in the left picture might seem, it can lead to huge disasters if you do not pay attention to humidity control. And I have seen more than 10% of crops ending in the bin because of botrytis. So with an infection, once the infection is visible and you see the spores, already a zillion spores are floating through the greenhouse and doing damage and infecting healthy plant. So it can cost a fortune, and it can easily be avoided by spending a little bit of money on dehumidification and look more careful into how you water the crop. But before we go more in detail about humidity control and watering, I would like to speak a little bit about botrytis sensitivity of the flower in relation to the flower color. So a lot of outdoor testing is done at various test stations around the world. And some test stations claim that variety X is better resistant to botrytis on the flower than variety I. That's not true, I think, because as far as the flowers, botrytis can attack every flower. It's just that it's been more visible or more easier visible, perhaps on the lighter colors, so the pastel colors, the whites, and then as you go from on the middle of the sheet here, where it says by color, so the soft colors are more. It becomes more visible. It doesn't mean that the colors on the right hand side of that line, so the violet, the magenta, and the reds, are not affected. It's just less visible, and also these flowers will not last to their full potential. Fantasia types seem to be a bit stronger in general. Looks like the flower petals are a bit thicker, and they are a little bit less affected because of that by flower botrytis. But also the shape of the flower plays a role in the sensitivity of the flower to botrytis. For example, the really fringed flowers of a pipoca and our new variety Falbala and the Metis pom-pom, for example, are a little bit more vulnerable compared to the standard types and the curly and Friola types. Before we go really into detail about humidity control, it's good to know a little bit about the life cycle of botrytis, because if you know your enemy, it becomes easier to kill the enemy or to fight against the enemy. So knowing your enemy is telling you what fight you're up to. At an average temperature of, let's say 20 degrees for the people, if there are any people attending from the US, that's about 68 Fahrenheit. Botrytis needs 100% humidity to grow a hyphae into a plant. So 100% humidity is needed to penetrate a hose. So this means at any given time, if we can break this, sorry, I have to start over again. So 100% humidity is needed to grow the hyphae into the host. And at a temperature of 20 degrees, 68 Fahrenheit, it takes about 4 hours to penetrate. So that means that if at any given time during these 4 hours, we could break this humidity down to under 100%, the hyphae would dry out and not be able to penetrate the host. Well, if the hyphae has successfully entered the host, it takes about 24 hours at this temperature for a mycelium to grow inside the leaf and start developing a toxin that slowly will kill the plant tissue. So because of this, it only takes 24 hours after the infection. It's very difficult to do a curative treatments, because once you see the botrytis is actually when you start seeing the botrytis on your plants, the infection has already taken place 2 or 3 weeks ago. So any spray that you would do around that time would at the best only slow down the development of botrytis, but it will not cure it, because there was already the plants were already infected 2 or 3 weeks before. So actually it's virtually impossible to do curative treatments. So that makes prevention of the disease key. So what can we do to try and prevent a botrytis infection taking place? That's what we will show in the next slide. So the first mode of prevention is through the watering that we do. And I think it speaks for itself that the overhead watering is not done if we try to avoid 100% humidity for 4 hours in a row. So in contrary to the start of the culture, where we promote watering being done from the top, from this time of year onwards, it's not done to water from the top. It's better to water from underneath. And the earlier you water on the day, of course, the bigger the chance will be that the plants will go dry into the night, because at night the humidity normally is a bit higher than during daytime. It's better to water as early as possible to give the plants the best chance to go dry into the night. Also, of course, it's beneficial to choose a bright day for watering in order that the plants again have the best chance to dry off quickly. Between waterings, allow the substrate to dry on the top. So again, at this time of year, plants are not so much in danger of wilting anymore. So you could dry back a little bit further, allowing this the top of the root zone becoming a bit dry, as you can see on the right picture, the top picture in the right, where there is hardly any water in the top of the pot soil there. But then again, there's no water needed, because as you can also see, there's no roots. So there is actually no reason for water to be there. On the contrary, if there would be water in that top zone and a cotyledon sits there and is starting to die off, the chances that it gets infected by botrytis only would increase. So that's that about the watering and moisture control in the root zone. But even more important to prevent botrytis from happening is, well, it's the most important thing, is managing the moisture management of the air. And my theory is that if the air humidity touches 80% or goes above 80%, the likelihood that the humidity inside the canopy of the plant is getting closer to 100% is increasing. So my golden rule of thumb is that if the air humidity starts to go above 80%, you should actively start dehumidification. And this would be done regardless of the temperature in the greenhouse, because the humidity would only encourage or give the possibility for the botrytis fungus to grow. It's more important to control the humidity than to control the temperature at that given point. But even before you start dehumidifying by cranking in a little bit of temperature, it's good to get already the fans in the greenhouse blending the air. So get the fans running at about 75%, and then if the humidity still keeps increasing, turn on some heating as the humidity reaches 80%. Something that some growers are not fully aware of is that by closing the shading cloth during the night, it avoids the plants radiate their temperature to a clear sky. So imagine that it's similar that if you would sit on a nice summer evening, outdoors under an umbrella, having a nice glass of wine or a glass of beer, you feel quite comfortable and it's quite cozy. But as soon as you move back from underneath the umbrella, you can feel the cold air falling down on you. Well, this is the same that plants experience on a night with a clear sky. When there is no protection to the clear sky, the plants will start radiate temperature to the sky, and the plant temperature can drop even below ambient temperature, and that can cause condensation of water in the plant canopy, and that again can start a botrytis infection. So if you move over the screens during a night, well, there's no light to block anyway, you put like a little bit of a barrier between the plant and the sky, and that will avoid the temperature emission to the sky during a bright night. What you also should be careful for is that if you water today, very often the next morning, if the climate is not very active during the night, you see guttation on the leaves, like you can see on the picture here at the bottom. You see water droplets at the side of the leaf. That's due to high root pressure because of the watering that you did yesterday, and probably the climate has not been as good during the night. So you should try and promote evaporation of the leaves during the night. And if you do that with heating, please do that with heating from above and not from underneath the plant, because if you would switch on the underneath heating, it would only make the roots become more active and make the guttation even worse. And the water from the guttation, of course, can be causing humidity and make it possible for the hyphae of the botrytis to grow into the plant. So what modes of dehumidifications are there? So, well, dehumidification is the principle of warm air can hold more water than cold air. So by taking in cold air from outside the greenhouse, even if that humidity is higher, if you take that air into the greenhouse where it slowly warms up and the warm air can hold more water, you are dehumidifying. So that can be done by increasing a difference of 2 degrees inside the greenhouse, 2 degrees warmer than outside the greenhouse. It would mean that there is already condensation from water against the colder glass into the gutters. But of course, that cannot be done in this time of year because the outside temperatures are relatively high still. So to create a big enough difference between outside and inside temperature, heating mostly is required, because you can try and limit the venting of the venting a little bit, and try to create a little warmer inside temperature than outside temperature. But if that's not good enough, you have to start putting in some active heating to try and drive the humidity below 80%. So in a lot of nurseries, I hear fans running 24/7. That's not needed. It's a bit of waste of electricity, in my opinion, although moving air can hold more water probably than still air. But the fans are there to avoid cold spots in the greenhouse, so the corners and near the sides where the glass is. My advice would be to only switch the fans on when the humidity starts going higher than 75%. So then you start already blending the cold air with the warmer air, and if the humidity still keeps going up, is when you switch on some heating to try and dry the air. Lately, there have been some growers installing air dryers. Like you can see on the, I have an example here on the top image here on the left. So the advantage of air dryers is that you don't need to increase the temperature to dry the air. So the air is actually sucked into this machine, the moisture is taken out, and the drier air comes out of the other end. This is the latest technology. I know a few growers that have installed these machines, and I must say they are quite happy with this new development and this new way of dehumidifying. But it's still new and probably still rather expensive, and there are other ways of trying to dehumidify through climate settings. If all these actions that we mentioned before still not lead to the desired result, some chemical interference might be considerable. But of course, like I said before, it's far better to take away the source of the problem, which actually is the humidity, than trying to cure it in a chemical way. But in some cases, humidity control will just not be good enough to keep humidity low enough. For example, if it's been drizzling with rain for one day or a number of days in a row, or if your climate control settings are not, you can't get them to work for you to get the humidity below 80%, or the climate control for one reason is limited or restricted, the likelihood of the climate being against effective humidity control, then is where you might need to interfere with a little bit chemical help. In these key cases, preventive sprays might be beneficial, but you should start early enough, even when you don't see any signs of botrytis in the greenhouse yet. So anytime when you go towards week 30 and beyond is where humidity normally starts to get higher and higher into your greenhouses, and also your plant has not been yet fully developed, so it's easier to reach the center of the plant, the heart of the plant, still with sprays. That's when you should get started again. Even if there's no visible signs of botrytis, do start early enough to try and keep the population down in order that it does not explode on you in a later stage. The general advice would be to use the softer active ingredients in an early stage of the culture. So that would mean that you have the more aggressive, the better working chemicals, so to say, still at hand in a later stage of the culture. But yeah, unfortunately, recent years, a lot of fungicides are no longer available to us anymore, and yeah, well, there's not so big possibility to alternate or to choose from.
Eric?
Yes?
May I interrupt you? Sorry for that, but I think I already have a question from Vasil. He asks if we have any options of spraying if he uses biological to eliminate mites.
The only biorational, so the only one that probably would be helpful would be Prestop then, because it's the only biorational one. But okay. I'm not a specialist on crop protection. I think for Vasil, and it would be best to contact his local crop protection supplier and ask for their advice. What would be safer to use when you also use the natural predators in the greenhouse.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. In any case, be careful spraying fungicides over a crop in flower. It can be done, however, but not with spraying, but then you should use low volume techniques. So, for example, a fogging system or a pulse fog. You actually can protect the flowers using some chemicals, but be careful doing it. Always try and do a test before you actually apply it. And of course, like I said before, always check with your local crop protection supplier for legal usage and instructions in your particular part of the world. That's it about what you can do on dehumidification and protection with chemicals. So also with change of season, something that needs some attention is the way you are feeding, because a well-fed crop, of course, on its own is more resilient to any fungus diseases than a crop that is a little bit, hungry, so to say. So we cannot mention it enough. A well-fed crop is more resilient to all kinds of fungus diseases than a not so well-fed crop. So if you are used to water, for example, in summertime, like 2-3 times a week with an EC of 1, you will notice now slowly that will go into only twice or even 1 time a week that you water. So it means that the number of waterings, the frequency, is cut in half. If that happens, you have to double the EC to maintain the same feeding level. So where you would be feeding 2 or 3 times a week with 1 EC in summer, if in autumn that goes back to 1 or 2 times, you should then water with 1.5 EC. For those of you that grow a winter crop, it can even be that you only water once every week or once every 2 weeks. In that case, it might be beneficial to increase the EC to 2. At no point you should really need to change your feeding recipe, because if you start with a feeding recipe where you apply like 80 milligrams, 80 ppms of nitrogen, and you would then double the EC, it would go maximum to 160, of course. That should not be needed to change the feeding recipe as such. Okay, we have already come to an end of this presentation. Just to wrap it up, here's a little summary. That we are now in a time where we have the change of season, where we slowly go from summer into fall season with lower light conditions, where temperatures go lower, and as a result of that, humidity increases. And as the humidity increases, also the risks with botrytis start to increase. So the advice in general is water in this time of year from underneath, that you pay very good attention to the humidification. So regardless of temperature, put a setting in there that when the humidity in the air goes above 80%, that you start dehumidifying, and most of the times that's best done by getting some heating going. Preventive spraying might be beneficial. curative spraying is not so good, because by the time you see botrytis spores already in the crop, the infection has already taken place 2 or 3 weeks before, and the spores are already building up into the greenhouse. Last but not least, when the watering frequency goes down, adapt your feeding to a lower water frequency by increasing the EC. Well, that was it for today. I hope you have dropped some questions at Guy for the question and answer session. So I'll stop the presentation from here and give the controls back to Guy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much for the presentation. Yes, indeed, we have a couple of questions. So some people came in the meeting a little later. So just to repeat that, use the chat section from your control panel of Zoom. If you have some questions, we'll take them happily, or if you have some comments, feel free to do that via the chat versions. So past that first questions I had, it's also a question concerning substrates, like what kind of substrate would it be best to use, and probably in link to already prevent botrytis risks.
Well, it should be a substrate that offers enough capillarity to get the moisture high enough into the pot, but also at the same time open enough to let the surface dry off as quick as possible, to get the top layer dry. It depends a little bit on pot size, of course. Of course, in a 9 or 10 centimeter pot, you then cannot use a very coarse type of substrate. But if it's not possible to make it open by a coarser fraction of peat, and try to make it more open with some fibers, for example, some wood fibers or some cocoa fiber.
Okay.
Nowadays, something that we see very strongly in the UK is that there is increased interest, driven by retailers, not by growers, by the way, for peat-free substrates. And
actually, we have a question on that, definitely, also to say whether there is any information about growing in peat-free media, also in link with botrytis, probably.
Yeah. So first of all, the peat-free medias, they tend to dry off quicker on the surface. So that's a good thing with concern to botrytis. On the feeding side, it's still, I have the impression that the peat-free substrates need to be fed a little bit higher than the peat-based substrates, probably because of the holding capacity, the buffering capacity of the substrates and the raw materials used. But I've seen in the last 2 weeks, I've visited quite a few growers in the UK, some more successful than others with peat-free substrate. And where it mostly came down to is to the feeding, not so much the physiological background of the substrate. So what most growers tell me is that once they started to recognize that the plants stay a little bit more compact, and they increased on the feeding, from there it catched up and it went better.
Actually,
roughly people say that they feed like 50% more than with a peat-based substrate. Go ahead, Guy.
Okay. Actually, I just want to give an insider information for those of you who can travel. We will have again our trials, production trials in Holland, October 26, 29th and November 2 to 5. And also our breeding trials in Fréjus. And in link with the peat-free media, we are running a test right now in Fréjus, and we should be able in November, for those who come, to share some more information. For those who cannot come, there will be a report on that, so don't forget to ask it to us later on.
I have some news for you, Guy. You did not know this yet, but also in the trial in Holland, there is a little section with some plants in peat-free material.
Isn't that fantastic? So, another question, how is the rooting and growing of cyclamen impacted by pack or by pot color? Means you're not growing in a black or in a brown pot, but maybe in a more fancy color pot. Does this have an impact?
Yeah, light traveling to a pot will give less roots at the outside of the pot. Nowadays you also see cyclamen grown in green packs where the light travels to. And when these packs are close to each other, you see also the roots at the side of the packs, but those on the corners where the full exit of light onto it, you don't see the root development at the side of the pack, and actually the plants tend to stay a little bit smaller.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We are close to the end of our reserved time, so we still have time for one extra questions if there is any. If not, let me thank you in behalf of all Morel Company for joining the meeting. Yes, here I have a question. Is there any use of zeolite to reduce humidity?
Zeolite.
Zeolite.
Yeah, I
Maybe.
know zeolite.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. I find that a very interesting question. I would like to, I don't know who is asking this question, but could I get in contact with that person? Because I would like to find out more myself.
Yes. Okay.
Zeolite is a volcanic stone, but it's where normally you have a volcanic eruption and you get the lava out of that. But
Yeah.
this is a type of stone that has been created underwater, so it has different characteristics than normal volcanic rocks.
Yeah, so we need to investigate in this a little further. Thank you. There was a question from Makis.
What I know from zeolite, by the way, is that it might be interesting also with peat-free substrates. The zeolite has a higher capacity also to buffer nutrients.
Okay.
In the substrate.
Okay. There we go. And that was probably the final questions, I assume. This is it for this session. So again, thank you for joining. We have recorded this. I hope you enjoyed that. Feel free to make us your comments if we have to improve something. And also shoot us some messages about the next webinar. If there is any specific topic you'd like us to work on and to share with you, feel free to exchange and to put some inputs. If not, we really wish you a very pleasant cyclamen season. We hope your crops or the crops that you are following, because we have some salespersons also here, are looking good. Keep us as a resource. If you have questions, Eric is the person to contact. If you're in other parts of the world, probably you know Joan also. And we definitely miss you. We hope to see you in Holland or in France or at any of the future exhibitions. Stay healthy, take care, and thank you. Feel free to log out anytime you'd like. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.